good to have slow days every once in a while.
I do enjoy slow days. Well, I keep myself busy.
You do.
I have a lot of extracurricular activities I like to fill my white space with.
I have the same thing. Like, I always feel like I'm so busy every day, even if I don't have a lot of work to do, because I've got everything else I have on my plate that I want to do. Like study crazy minority languages that nobody speaks.
Super important. Yeah, I always have so much I want to get to. I even get mad at myself at the end of a very productive day, like, oh, I didn't get to those 2 things. Yeah. I failed.
I've been doing Scottish Gaelic on Duolingo. Which
that's actually pretty cool.
Is spoken by 45,000 people worldwide.
Again, this will go good with we were just talking with Matt with your next book. Some very small minority of people meet a small minority of people.
It's very similar to Irish, so that's helping, but it's not a very useful skill to have, but it's interesting.
They don't teach you the accent too, do they?
Well, it's kind of. I mean, it's hard to learn a language without learning the accent.
That's true. I do like it when British people try to talk with an American accent.
Oh, it's funny. I love it.
I think it's much more funnier than the
they overdo the R's because they don't pronounce the R's in Britain, so they're always like the car. They really dig into those R's. That's pretty funny. So it's a weird time in DC.
It's very strange.
I went out on last Wednesday when the inauguration was happening, and I wandered around, and I walked around the whole perimeter. There's National Guard folks everywhere, and there's like no protesters or anything. I saw a couple anti-abortion people, but that's it. Everyone else was media. It was very quiet and very strange. And, I feel like the whole lockdown was extremely overkill because they were embarrassed about the Capitol breach and everything. You have all these thousands of soldiers standing around doing literally nothing because there's nobody trying to break in or do anything. Pretty funny.
Yeah, just driving in today. I thought they would have cleared out by now, but I guess not. And I heard there was 20,000, but then I also heard there was 65,000 National Guards, so I'm not sure.
65,000 seems like a lot.
Yeah, I thought 20,000 seemed almost reasonable. Yeah. Still more than Afghanistan, but whatever.
More people in the U.S. Capitol than in Afghanistan. That's pretty funny.
But yeah, it was a very strange. I mean, DC is already strange to begin with on normal when things are normal with quotations. Now it was wild.
Yeah, it's easy to get depressed about like your city being under martial law and military rule and everything, but I don't know. It hasn't really bothered me much. Ever since the new year, I've been a little bit zen about everything, and I'm just walking around looking at people being like, oh, this is interesting. What an interesting time to be alive.
I was thinking about that too. I was driving into. I was like, man, I should have I've never been one to journal at all. Like maybe when I was a kid, I attempted it when someone bought me one, but man, I should have journaled all of 2020 because maybe no one cares now, but in 30, 40 years. Maybe it would have been worth publishing.
Yeah, this is the first time I've been on this side of the table on Last Call. I just realized.
Are you sure?
Yeah, I'm always on that side, and you're always on this side.
No, you're wrong. You're thinking because we've been doing the dual.
Oh, with the double things.
Double interviews.
Yeah,
you're usually over there.
All right. It isn't weird, I guess.
I'm going to break right into the booze because...
Yeah, please do. I'm all disoriented, clearly. I need some drink to settle me down.
Let's see. This is a silverback. It was actually a gift from the Kibbies for Christmas. Mm-hmm. Their Sour Mashed Corn Whiskey Alpha Series by Christine Riggleman.
It's a limited edition, and it's signed by Christine. These are our friends, the Rigglemans, who own Silverback Distillery in Virginia.
I don't seem to have a place to tear it off. Oh, boy.
Oh, no, it's going to be a struggle.
I'm going to have to go get my keys or something. All right, well, why don't we continue?
Look at that. Perfect. And while you're doing that, we can talk about censorship, because that's one of the things we wanted to talk about today. It's kind of nuts. We've seen a kind of sudden ramp up at crackdown on conservative speech or online, and they say it's because of inciting violence, but they're shutting down the president of the United States, no longer the president of the United States, but the ex-president of the United States. On Twitter, they blocked the entire media site of Parler using their hosting services, which is now gone, and maybe it'll come back and maybe it won't, who knows. And the justification for all this is inciting violence, but to take down a whole social media site just because a few people may have said some irresponsible things on it seems like really hitting a fly with a sledgehammer.
Yeah, you've been doing a little bit of putting together a video with Sam.
Yes.
So I've got a few thoughts. Mine are a little different now that I think the dust has settled, and my initial the night it was I think it was January 6th, right after the riots, and they started just suddenly Trump is off Twitter. Mm-hmm. That was definitely an emotional. There we go, success. But an emotional response is how could we have just censored the sitting president of the United States.
It's pretty
of America.
nuts. It's like nothing I've ever seen.
It's very bizarre. I would call it creepy, dystopian. But now that like the dust is settled, I definitely have a lot of thoughts as I've sorted through them. But I don't know. In your research, as you started putting stuff together, where have you?
Well, so Sam and I have been working on a video on this, writing one, and the point of it is sort of to point out that censorship is not a partisan issue, and that like once you allow people in charge to be censoring others, it can cut both ways. And we draw from a lot of historical examples of like the one I like is McCarthyism, where Senator Joseph McCarthy was like singling out people in Hollywood who he thought were communists and trying to drum them out of the business, get them blackballed, and maybe even prosecute them legally. And like that's not okay, and it's really scary. And that's a case where it was used by the right wing against the left wing. Now everyone's like, well, this is fine because we're getting rid of these right wing people who we don't like, and it's not fine because like the left isn't going to be in power forever. At some point, the right's going to be in power again, and now you're telegraphing to them, yeah, it's okay to do this to us when you're in power. And like with McCarthy, like communism was a dangerous ideology. Like communism is responsible for the deaths of millions of people. You can always justify these things for reasons of safety and saying, well, they're going to cause people to die if we don't censor them. But I think it's such a dangerous path to go down because you can kind of use that justification for almost anything. You can broaden your definition of what constitutes a violent threat or a danger, and in order to censor people. So there's lots of examples like that in the video, and people of all political stripes should be afraid of this because it can cut both ways. No matter who you are, if they're going to come for anybody's speech, eventually they're going to come for your speech.
Yeah, when I was to that point, I feel like we've lost the cultural battle in a way, or almost we have to go retake it back, because my mind first goes to solutions with this. Maybe that's how we've been conservatives. I think the Democrats also want to do it in some manner, but people on the left, the whole year we've been talking about Section 230 and what to do about big tech and antitrust. It's all solution based. Like, what can government do to fix this problem? And I started after Jan 6. I was like, I don't know if I kind of knew, but I started switching. Like, I don't think there's a solution that government can fix here. This is like, if people are willing to accept the censorship, then what's the point?
This is always the problem we have as libertarians. Everybody wants a silver bullet. Everybody wants, what one thing can we do that's going to make this problem go away? And it almost always is the case where there's not one thing you can do to make it go away. And I've seen kind of 3 points of view on this, and I disagree with all of them. The left-leaning point of view is, well, these people are dangerous, radical, right-wing extremists, so it's good that they're censored. We need to not let them have a platform. It's good. I think that's a terrible, awful point of view because, it's a subjective thing. Who's dangerous, who's terrible, who's a radical. It all depends on who's in charge and who's making these decisions, and that can be so easily abused. And I think, we should let everybody speak and let everybody have their piece, and we'll know, who's good, who we should listen to and who we shouldn't listen to based on the content of their speech. I always say the solution to bad speech is not less speech, it's more speech. And then on the right, you have people who are upset that the president got kicked off Twitter. You have people who are upset that the right wing is getting censored, understandably, and they should be upset about this. It's very upsetting, and it's wrong. And they say, well, the government has to do something. We got to punish these companies. And first of all, the government's in the hands of the Democrats now. They're running everything. You really think they're going to do something about this? That's crazy. And then second of all, I just think it's bonkers to imagine that big government is going to be a solution to more freedom, more open expression, more free speech, more nonpartisanship. It's just never going to happen. Like it's a pipe dream if you think that the government's going to protect these sort of things. Regulation always makes things worse. It always is used as a weapon against political enemies. It can't be done. And so I really think that's a dangerous path as well. And then the third point of view that I see people having is the crazy libertarians like me. A lot of them are saying, well, this isn't from the government. The First Amendment only applies to government. These are private companies. They're allowed to do what they want. You shouldn't be able to force Twitter to host someone that they don't want to host. So this is fine. And while I agree that you shouldn't be able to force platforms to host people they don't want to host, I think that's correct. I think they're missing the point, and I don't think it's okay. And just because something is legal doesn't make it good. It doesn't make it acceptable. And I think, well, we should treat it like we treat anything that we find unacceptable in society that's not illegal. And the analogy I use is bigotry and racism. It's not illegal to be a racist, but we know as a society that being a racist is not acceptable. And if someone portrays themselves that way, if someone outs themselves as a racist, they face consequences for that. Not legal consequences, but social consequences. We don't tolerate it. And I think we need to have the same attitude towards censorship. We shouldn't tolerate censorship. It should be, free speech should be an inviolable principle that we all stand behind, regardless of whether it's the government involved or a private company, and we need to not tolerate censorship. That is not an easy solution, because you got to get people on board. You got to get people to agree to that, and you have to get everybody as a society to do it. But I don't think it's impossible either, because like things that were tolerated 10 years ago are not tolerated now in the realm of bigotry and stuff. And so, you can move the population, public opinion in a certain direction if you have enough popular support for it. So it can be done. I just think it's not satisfying to anybody, because it's not like one thing we can do right now to solve the problem.
Yeah. I think you put that better than I could put it. Especially the point number 3, I've been thinking about that point a lot, where obviously I'm a proponent of free and open markets, and the typical answer that you put well is, oh, they're private, they should be allowed to do it, they shouldn't be forced. While I'm like you and I agree with it, it's a very unsatisfactory answer for the average person who isn't as philosophical, I don't know if philosophical is the right word, isn't into free markets and economics like myself or yourself is. It's almost like, no, we should do something. And then it's also unsatisfactory with the solution that you give, which I think is right. It has to be a cultural battle, but everyone wants that silver bullet, and that's the uphill climb. But I think I'm confident that you're right, that it's going to be a long-term fight to win back the culture, or to march back through these institutions that we've lost, where people have lost faith in them, where our moral foundation or our virtues or that our shared principles have been eroded or no longer there. It's almost like it's going to be a gradual chipping away to get the general public back on board. Yeah. Where it used to be the liberals of the left were the free speech lunatics, right? They were the ones who said you should be able to say whatever you want. I disagree with you, but I'll defend your right to the death. That's gone, clearly. It's been really disappointing to see organizations like the ACLU just be AWOL on this kind of stuff, because they used to be the absolutist. Like the ACLU, I have a lot of issues with the ACLU, but they used to be absolutist about free speech, and they defend everybody. They defend Nazis, they defend criminals, they defend the worst people in society, and say, yeah, they're bad people, but they should be allowed to say what they want to say. It's such an important role that is not being filled now. And there are a few people on the left who are still kind of good on this sort of thing. You have people like, I think Bill Maher is reasonably good on this. I think Steven Pinker is good on this. I think, who else? Stephen Fry is good on this. Eric Weinstein's good on this. There's a few people, Sam Harris maybe, pretty good on this. But, for the most part, the left has gone completely censorious, and, you have to toe the line, or else we're going to shut you down with cancel culture. Do you think there's also, I feel like I want to dive a little bit, or ask you a little bit about the culture too, this cancel culture, or I don't know what kind of totalitarianism you want to call it, like a soft totalitarianism. It's different. This isn't Soviet, fascist, communist Russia, or Nazi Germany, where the shock troops will show up and drag you off to jail, censor you type of situation. This is almost, we're going to virtue signal and be quiet in hopes to be left alone. It's almost, I'll go a little controversial, edgy here. It's like, I question people or stores that put up the BLM sign in their window, or the LGBT flag in their window. Like, do they really care? Or are they just hoping that everyone leaves them alone? Is this kind of like, I'm the Soviet shopkeeper who puts up some propaganda phrase in my window, like, I hope the secret police don't deal with me, so I'm going to pretend to toe the line here, where people in society now have we been isolated enough that now we're virtue signaling in hopes to just be left alone and live in peace, even if we don't agree with it?
I think there's definitely an element of that. I think it's like paying your protection money, particularly like this summer with the BLM riots and everything. Yeah, I saw everybody putting up BLM signs in their window, and I think it's like, if we don't put this in our window, we're going to have our window smashed, so we better put it up. I think it's fear in a lot of places, and clearly some people agree with it and put it up because they want to spread that message, but if you're a business, you're a profit-maximizing organization. And, well, first of all, if you put up a political slogan in your window, you risk alienating half your customers. So it's not usually, in most circumstances, it's not a great thing to do. But if you don't put it in your window, someone's going to break into your store and burn it down. Then it becomes a different calculation, right? Like, maybe it is worth putting it up in that sense, or maybe you just feel so strongly about it and have such principles that you don't care if you lose the business. But I find that hard to believe.
Yeah, there's a restaurant near where I live, and I will not oust them out of wanting to make sure they stay safe from the mob. But the name of the restaurant is actually a name for a Confederate battle flag. But if you're not a Civil War nerd, you would never know. But they also have a big BLM sign in their window. So I kind of find it a little funny.
Yeah.
But I was like, no one really knows unless you're a historian. But I often question, like, I was like, if someone figures it out and ousts them, like, oh, they're paying homage to the Confederate with their name, the Confederacy with the name of their restaurant, while toting a BLM, that would at least make for some online drama and a headache for them.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So the kind of where I get, like, I feel like we've been very isolated with the lockdown. We've been told to sequester in our homes, not to talk to people, hide behind masks. We have lost all sense of community and togetherness in a lot of ways. And there's a lot of, when you don't have community, it's hard to combat, the Leviathan, whether that's the state or big tech and the censorship. So I feel like to get everyone on board, to get them to stand up and speak out like, hey, censorship is wrong, we almost have to create a sense. People have to be courageous to come out, but it's hard when you feel so alone.
Yeah, I think if I had to pick a word to define 2020, it would be fear, because there's obviously the fear of the virus and the lockdowns and everything, but there's also the fear that comes with the intimidation of these, bullies who are saying you have to agree with us or else we're going to shut you down. And, it's a minority of people. This is not a large group of people who are participating in this, but they're loud and they're forceful and they're scary. And they're willing to use violence in some cases. And so people are afraid of them, and they're willing to go along with things that they may not otherwise agree with because they just don't want to be bothered. They just don't want to be attacked. It's the same thing with, like we had with after 9/11 with the people worried about drawing cartoons of Muhammad and stuff. And there's only a small number of people who are willing to do anything about it, but they're willing to do such extreme things about it that no one wants to risk it. Everyone wants to be careful and not offend anybody, It's really scary, and we have to get over this fear as a nation that we have of this living in constant fear and say, well, no, there's some things that are worth fighting for, and there's some things that are worth standing up for. Free speech is one of those. I don't care if people are going to kind of come after me. I'm going to say, no, we need to be able to defend these people. And when even you have the ACLU, which used to be fearless, kowtowing to these people and saying, no, we don't want to offend anybody with this defending this speech that's so unpopular. If they're caving into fear, and everybody's caving into fear, and we need to somehow claw our way back to a place of more courage to stand up for what's right.
Did you see, I just saw the headline, I did not read it. The ACLU put out some statement or article defending the censorship of Trump, that somehow it helps protect free speech. I saw it, did not read it. I should have read it.
I haven't seen that, but it doesn't surprise me, but it's very disappointing to see.
Yeah, they did put it out. I saw it shared somewhere. I should have read it. I kind of just was like, kind of figure, but probably would have been better for me to at least dive in to hear their argument, to at least understand where they're coming from. But
right,
yeah, so much for the free speech. No matter what, you
don't protect free speech by taking away people's speech. And I think this crazy contradiction in terms where you think, well, in order to protect freedom, we have to have censorship, and it doesn't work that way. Yeah. Some people think that way, but it's not how it works.
Let me ask you another thought that I've had. I've doing some reading. I've been reading a lot. I've been going through a lot of this guy's essays. I've told you a little bit about him. Wilhelm Röpke. He was the economist. I just finished this one essay by him called Centralism and Decentralism. And basically he argues heavily that we need to decentralize everything. He thinks everything should be localized, everything should be centralized, and then we should have open markets, which is great. I agree with it.
Decentralization is a key, for sure.
He is so adamant for decentralization and so much against centralization. He's very much against big business, where he, in his article, without saying it, I'm like, this guy would favor some antitrust, which came to thought is, do you think, or if I'll pose a statement, I'll let you respond to it. Big tech or big business, maybe to expand it beyond big tech, is more of a threat to liberty right now than government?
Well, this is what people always say. And it's a little bit of a hard question to answer because the two things are symbiotic. They feed on each other. First of all, like super big business, the way we think of it, can't really exist without the government. The government gives all kinds of benefits to these people to stifle competition, to make them have this kind of quasi-monopoly or oligopoly where they can take over huge sections of the market. Doesn't really exist, at least not in any kind of permanent fashion or even a long-term fashion in a free market. So that's part of it. And then, all the power that business has that gets from government. Business has no power on its own. Everybody talks about corporate power. They're like, what about the power of business? You're all worried about the power of government. What about the power of business? Like, the way I understand power, they don't have any power. They can't make me do anything I don't want to do. Amazon can't make me do anything I don't want to do. Google can't make me do anything I don't want to do. I always have the option to leave their platform, to not give them my money, to do other things. The example I like to give is the attempt to make Google Glass, the little glasses, the smart glasses that have the computers in them. Google's the biggest, most powerful company in the world. And they're like, here's a product that we're going to force onto the population. And the population just quietly folded its arms and said, no, we don't like that. And they spent, I don't know how many millions of dollars trying to get people to buy those things, and nobody would. And everyone hated them, and they had to withdraw them. And like, Google couldn't, with all of its supposed power, they couldn't make anyone buy that product who didn't want it. The only thing that big business can do is use lobbyists to get the government to pass laws that will help them get rid of their competition and increase their market power and just, force people to do what they don't want to do. But business by itself is pretty powerless because people can always walk away and take their money elsewhere.
Yeah.
So I don't really put much fear behind the power of business, except for when it's wedded to the power of government, which is what we often see in the case of big corporations. And why I think there's such a paradox of the progressives and their hatred of business, but they love government. And they don't seem to realize this, that like the business that they hate is feeding off the government that they love and could only exist with that government. The more power you give government, the more power it gives to business. And, if you really care about small businesses and localism and decentralization and all these things they claim to care about, mom and pop stores, you should reduce the power of government. Look at lockdowns. Lockdowns is a perfect example. You care about the mom and pop store on the corner? Well, it's illegal for them to be open, so people buy from Amazon instead. And that's a government did that, How is that helping the little guy? How is that helping people buy local? It's helping the big monopolies. It's helping the big corporations. And it's ridiculous that people can't understand that.
Yeah, and I think to your point about how leftists, and maybe that I'm overgeneralizing, probably the leftists in power that hate it, but there's also enough people that complain about business and the immorality they perceive of profit. But if you go to these little farms or these independent farms and their farmers markets, it's predominantly hippie leftist people. But what are they celebrating there? That is a company that has decided not to participate with traditional ways of doing business, to find their own way to market. That's a very free market thing that they're celebrating. And even conservatives will be like, oh, a bunch of hippies over there, and we'll hate on that farm. But really, that's what we are supporting. It's very much our ideologies get in the way there.
Well, yeah, and that's why like someone like Thomas Massey is so interesting, because he is a conservative by all accounts, but he runs one of these little local farms that the left loves, and he has that kind of instinct. And he actually connects the dots and points out that it's government that's stopping him from being successful there. It's government that passes laws that prevents him from selling meat directly to consumers. He's got to go through these processing plants and everything that are, those giant monopoly processing plants in order to sell anything to anybody. And there's all kinds of reasons why it's hard for a local farmer like that to succeed. And they're all government reasons. It's all the farm bill that gives all this money to the big established factory farms. These people are, if you actually care about local farmers, you should be against big government, not for it. But people don't seem to be able to make those connections, except for Thomas Massey.
Yeah, I also think, it's very interesting. I have a really good friend. Was one of my groomsmen in my wedding. Likes to listen to the podcast as well. He works out in Silicon Valley. Mm-hmm. He has a passion for going to these like small startups and trying to do something cool. And he hops through them and always looking for the next new thing. It's a really cool. I love talking to him because he's always got a new tech companies that he's working with. But he's talking how in Silicon Valley you have like two sides. You have the Facebook, Google, the behemoths are on one side of Silicon Valley, and then you have all these little startups on the other side. Little startups are very pro-market, competition, decentralization is a word that he'll even use, all great ideas, but they all they all dream of jumping over to the other side and becoming the next Facebook. So they're all, usually, if one makes it, they're all for competition, markets, ease of access. But if any of them ever do make that jump and become a behemoth, they immediately shed those principles.
Yes.
And they're like, well, you know what? I'm going to get me some good old lobbyists. I'm going to send them over to D.C. We're going to get some good lobbying done. We're going to get some regulations put on us to help us capture more of the market or keep those little guys on the other side of the street where I used to be out.
It's not just that they suddenly turn greedy, which although that's part of it, it's that the government forces them to do this. There's a great story about Microsoft and their big antitrust suit that's really famous from, I think, the year 2000, where they got sued for bundling Internet Explorer with their operating system by Netscape Navigator for antitrust. And they, like Microsoft had a policy before that. We're not going to have any lobbyists. We don't want to play the game. We just want to make our product and sell it to people. And that was great. But then they got hit with this multi-million-dollar antitrust suit and they lost. And Bill Gates said, well, that's it. Like, I'm hiring the most expensive lobbyists I can get. I'm never going to let this happen again. They used to
brag about never having lobbyists. Didn't Microsoft used to do that?
They got driven to it by antitrust laws. They were forced to do it because otherwise they're going to get eaten alive out there. And so that's the problem. Yeah.
Now, here's another question. I don't pay attention to the lobbyist game, and you at least have been in D.C. a little bit more than I have in your career. When I look at lobbyists, as an outsider, I see the lobbyists working on behalf of the company. But is there an argument to be made that it's actually the inverse, that the lobbyists somehow are working more for the government and going into the companies in a way? They're almost turned around. I don't know if I'm thinking through that correctly.
I mean, like, everybody loves to hate on lobbyists, and I understand why. But I don't really think that's the right outlet for our anger, because the lobbyists are there to represent their clients, and they're there to try to get what's best for their company. And a lot of the times that's, hey, just don't overregulate us. Just leave us alone and let us do our thing, which is great. I mean, we should have lobbyists to do that. Sometimes it's, hey, you should really regulate our competitor and drive them out of business, which is terrible. They shouldn't do that. But the reason they do that is because they can do that, because that's what the role government plays. The government picks winners and losers, and it says, you're going to be successful in the market and you're not. And the way we make this decision is who lobbies us harder and who gives us the nicest gifts and who, takes us out to the nicest lunches and things like that. And so, like, I don't really blame the lobbyists, although they do a lot of evil things. But they're there to represent their clients, which is fine. Like, someone has to do that. But I blame the fact that government has the power to give those favors in the first place. If we got rid of the power of government to give those favors, lobbyists would lose all their power as well.
Yeah, and to kind of bring it back to where we started, we started when we were talking about big tech, about how it's really a cultural change. And if we bring it up now to this little guy who becomes a big guy and he kind of sheds his principles. Like, if you're truly a free market, if you truly believe in the market, truly believe in the importance, if you ever get to that place where you can afford a lobbyist, the government could come to you and be like, hey, we're going to do you this favor.
Yeah.
You should turn that down. Like, that's a cultural change. That's a moral foundation. That's, hey, I believe in this is bigger. It might not be good for me. It would be great to regulate out my competition, but I believe in the market so much, I'm against that.
Yeah, but I think you've got an uphill battle trying to get people to act against their own financial self-interest. I think one of the things I like about libertarianism is that it acknowledges that people have a financial self-interest and doesn't try to wave it away and pretend, well, they just will be good people and they won't have that self-interest. It tries to accommodate that through, not giving government a lot of power. Because if you say, well, we're going to have the government have the power to give people these gigantic financial favors, but we're just going to trust people not to take advantage of it, I think you're being foolish. People are going to take advantage of it. That's the way people are. And it's not to say that people are immoral or bad, but like they're self-interested and they're going to do that sort of thing. So the best way to solve the problem of self-interest is to structure society in such a way that self-interest requires you to do things that are good for society or good for other people, which is what I like about capitalism, because in order to make money in a capitalist economy, you have to do something for someone else. In order to make money in a totalitarian economy or a communist economy or a fascist economy, you have to get a government favor. And so, which is better, doing something for someone else or getting a government favor? Clearly doing something for someone else is better. So that's why I like that kind of structure of society that libertarianism envisions, because it forces people to do good things out of their own self-interest, as opposed to just trying to screw everybody over using government power.
Yeah, I mean, obviously you hit on there. It was either Federalist 51 or Federalist 10, where no men are angels. Or if men were angels, we would not need the Constitution, laws, etc. Because, it'd be fine. We could put a few angels in charge and the world would work miraculously well, which is an illusion.
I always think that quote kind of misses something, though, right? Because it says if men were angels, they wouldn't need to be governed, which is true. But, if men are devils, then you shouldn't put anyone in charge of governing them, because you're going to put devils in charge of governing them.
That's true.
So it sort of cuts both ways. It's like men are simultaneously angels and devils, and you shouldn't put them in charge of other people, and you shouldn't, trust them to do the right thing on their own. You need to have a system that incentivizes them to do the right thing.
Okay, Tolkien.
Thank you.
Thinking of his letter. No man is fit to rule another.
I've been writing something on that very letter.
Have you really?
Recently, yeah.
That's a cool history. I think I've always heard of it, but I didn't realize he was writing his son during World War II, obviously.
Yeah.
You know about Tolkien having to go through World War I.
Yes.
Which I understand his sentiment. Not
No,
really, but I can imagine his
I'm
sentiment.
writing an essay right now on anarchist thought in the writings of Tolkien, because there's that quote, and from the same letter there's another quote where he says, "My opinions incline more and more towards anarchy, not meaning whiskered men with bombs, but the absence of control." And I like that's a great way to think about it, the absence of control. And then there's all this stuff in the Lord of the Rings, like the Shire doesn't have any kind of government. There's no government in the Shire. It's just like there's a little tiny volunteer police force to keep things orderly, but everybody else just minds their own business and does the right thing. And so I think that's really interesting. There's sort of this weird anarchist strain that runs through the writings of Tolkien that I'm kind of exploring.
Oh, interesting. I look forward to that coming out.
Yeah.
Or whenever you produce it. Well, sir.
This was good. I like this.
Yeah, it's got a little bit of a bite to it.
Yeah,
so.
it's very corn. I mean, like you can really taste the corn in it, but it's good.
Well done, Christine.
Thank you.